So great, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ren Benjamin. I'm a biotechnology analyst at Raymond James, and welcome to the gene therapy panel for rare diseases. And so I thought, since a lot of people in the audience might not be familiar with all the companies that are on the stage, that we could just do a brief intro for each panelist on the stage and tell a little bit about the company and the rare diseases that they're focusing on, before jumping on into a bunch of the questions that we typically get from investors, as well as questions that the companies have had to field over the last year or so. And so maybe we can start off, Olivier, with you.
Okay, well, I'm Olivier Danos. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of REGENXBIO. REGENXBIO is a gene therapy company that was founded in 2009. And the creation of REGENXBIO was around the gene transfer technology platform that came out of University of Pennsylvania, Jim Wilson's laboratory. This is the work that discovered a trove of new AAV capsids naturally occurring in various tissues from humans or non-human primates. And the work at UPenn went on to show that vectors could be made with these new capsids, and that was expanding the toolbox for gene therapy in a very considerable fashion. What REGENX has done for a number of years was to partner some of these capsids with licensees. We'll now have I think something that close to 20 products that are being developed in the clinic with about 12 of our licensees. At the same time, starting about 5 years ago, REGENX started to develop its own products. We now have 4 active clinical development programs. One in wet AMD, where we've completed the dosing of all cohorts now. One in hypercholesterolemia, familial hypercholesterolemia, and 2 other in mucopolysaccharidosis, lysosomal storage disease, where we propose to treat by injecting AAV vectors intrathecally. So this is a varied landscape of indication, but all around the same technology, which is the AAV vectors originating from PEN, AV8, 9, etc.
Jeff. Great, thanks, Ren. My name is Jeff Davis. I'm the COO of Abeona Therapeutics. Like the others here, we're a publicly traded gene therapy company in the rare disease space. We have a diversified portfolio, really sort of in 2 different ways. We have a dermatology program and recessive dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa. That technology is more akin to the CAR T therapies in that it's an autologous gene-corrected cell therapy, which we're intending to put into a pivotal phase 3 trial in the second half of this year. We have a number of metabolic programs in the lysosomal storage disease space. Like that of REGENX, those are AAV-delivered gene substitution approach. We have 2 clinical stage assets in MPS IIIA and B, that's Sanfilippo syndrome A and B, that are enrolling patients now here and in Spain and in Australia. And we have 2 preclinical programs in 2 forms of Batten's disease, the CLN3 and the CLN1 variety. And then lastly, we have a program in hematology, and that's in the gene editing space, some technology we're working on in collaboration with the University of Minnesota, and that's a CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing approach in Fanconi anemia. And that sort of sits on top of a next generation platform that we call our AIM. It's a chimeric AAV vector program where we're looking to actually produce customized adeno-associated viruses that help with tissue targeting or detargeting or making them more permeable to the blood-brain barrier, et cetera. So that's sort of a quick overview of what Abeona Therapeutics is doing.
All you, Matt.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Patterson. I'm the president and CEO of Audentes Therapeutics. We are a company focused on developing AAV gene therapy products for serious and life-threatening rare diseases. We're based in San Francisco, a team of about 180 people now. We have a pipeline of 4 programs: severe neuromuscular disease, X-linked myotubular myopathy, a liver disease called Crigler-Najjar syndrome. Pompe disease is another neuromuscular disease, and then an inherited arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmia called CASQ2-CPVT, which stands for catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, which is fun to break out at parties with family and friends if you want to dazzle them. It's a company that's gone through some really incredible milestones just this year. We started in the clinic in our lead program in MTM in the fall, and we're thrilled to share promising early data in January. After anywhere between 4 and 12 weeks in our first few boys treated, we were able to demonstrate really compelling early efficacy, and we're thrilled by that progress. So we're at an exciting stage of our lives, advancing that program and producing more data. In fact, just in a couple weeks, we'll have 6-month data from those first 3 patients treated that we're looking forward to sharing. We also started early this year in the clinic with our Crigler-Najjar treatment, and we'll have early data from that as well next month. So a lot going on, and of course more data over the course of the year. Pompe, our next program to go in the clinic, we believe, by the end of this year. The company's profile includes an investment in large-scale internal GMP manufacturing, which was a strategic decision we made more than 3 years ago now. And I've often described it as the most important and meaningful strategic decision we ever made. We believe it gives us a major strategic advantage in that it increases our chances of hitting our timelines, keeping our costs under control, protecting trade secrets or IP, but also giving us the strategic advantage of adding more programs to our pipeline over time, which is part of our goal. So that's sort of an overview. It's an exciting time for the company, and thrilled to be a part of the panel with such distinguished gentlemen.
Arthur.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arthur Tzianabos, CEO of Homology Medicines. It's a company that was really started by some ex-Shire rare disease folks that we pulled together to move forward a genetic medicines platform based on AAVs that were discovered at the City of Hope Hospital, isolated from CD34 stem cells. And these AAVs belong to Clade F, have some novel properties, the ability to actually deliver genes in a standard classical gene transfer modality, the way we think about classical gene therapy. But also these AAVs have the property of mediating promoterless, nuclease-free gene insertion in a very targeted way by homologous recombination, hence the name Homology. And so we feel like this is a way to actually use a naturally occurring DNA repair process to insert genes in a very precise manner. The company's focused on 3 main areas: inborn errors in metabolism, monogenic rare CNS disorders, as well as CD34 diseases such as sickle cell, and beta-thal in vivo approaches to those diseases. We did a significant deal, a collaboration with Novartis last November, and that is around actually leveraging the platform, expanding into a new area for us, which is ophthalmology. Core to them, really good for us to expand our pipeline, and we also are partnered on sickle cell in vivo and ex vivo approaches. We will be in the clinic next year with our lead program, which is in a gene transfer program in PKU, which is a disease that we feel there's still a lot of unmet need in that patient population. And I guess we're the newest member of the public company club in gene therapy, having brought the company public just 3 weeks ago. So unlike before, now anything I say will and can be used against me. So,
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great.
Well, welcome to the club. So maybe we can just start off. We get different types of questions from obviously different investors, right? The long investors have a fundamental view on the types of indications you're tackling. The guys who are short have another. So let me just dive right in. There's a growing sense by some that the space is getting too crowded in rare diseases. there's the feeling from others that the space is just kind of opening up, especially when you're targeting a lot of these diseases with no treatment options. And so I guess which point is correct, and maybe more importantly for the audience, how do you go about making the decision to go after one indication versus another? And maybe Arthur, you can start off.
I thought we were going the other way. Yeah, happy to start off. I think for us, there's a lot of experience in rare disease drug development in the company from our Shire days. We've been through probably 5,000 meetings of pipeline prioritization and disease selection using different technologies. So for us, there are some key hallmarks that we focused on. First and foremost, unmet need for patients. And we're at a time right now where technology is at our disposal to really potentially cure patients. So we really focus on disease biology, unmet need, and whether or not the approach we can take, whether it's gene transfer or gene editing, gene correction, has the ability to affect essentially a lifelong cure. I think the other thing is definitely competition. We feel like we want to move into a disease area where these patients aren't necessarily going to be served by another technology or another company. So that is definitely part of the strategic decision. And I would agree that right now there's a lot of folks coming into the space, but I think that's a healthy dynamic for this field. I think we'll see some consolidation. We saw a little bit of that on Monday last week. But I do feel that another hallmark for us is definitely not necessarily driven by commercial, but it's definitely a focus for investors. So we feel like we have to focus on that as well.
Matt, maybe just to that question as well, how do you guys prioritize and how did you pick those disease indications? And then how do you handle, because it's rare diseases and the patient populations are small, how do you handle when new competitors come on board? How do you think about that?
Sure. So we've tried to, one of the things we highlight about our corporate story is trying to take a very thoughtful approach to the indications that we target. And from the early days of the company, I appreciated the idea of simplifying as much as possible, which is a concept that I've embraced over the years in my career, and that we work in such a complex field that if there are ways we can simplify the equation, in particular when we're using highly innovative science, which, let's be honest, we're still in the early days, I think, of truly understanding gene therapy, gene editing, and its impact on patients. That if there are ways to simplify, we should do that. In particular, when we're starting a company, as we did in 2012. The criteria we tend to focus on include rare, serious, and life-threatening, ideally with no available treatment, so the medical need is sky high. We intentionally go after targets where we think there's a logical fit with the science of AAV as we understand it today. And in particular, we like to zero in on a couple other aspects, which are the health of the tissue that we're trying to treat. Ideally, a tissue target that's as healthy as possible with the best chance of showing recovery after treatment. And as a part of that, what's the protein that we're replacing? And you'll notice in our initial indications that we're often targeting enzymes and specifically proteins that we don't feel you need a lot of to have a meaningful therapeutic effect. So we've used those strict criteria to start. I think we're going to benefit from that, in particular in MTM1 and Kriegler, which are ultra orphans. And one of the questions we get is about commercial opportunity and so forth. But I've always embraced the idea of getting started in targets where I thought the chance of success was high, that the path to approval could be brief, and that we could build a strong foundation from which we could take bigger risks over time onto more complex targets. I mean, the reality is there's an incredible number of rare diseases with massive medical need that this science could benefit from this science. But every target's unique, and different complexities exist, and so it's going to take hard work to get there. But I do feel like there's tremendous opportunity. I'm not bothered at all by the number of companies coming in. I think there's many different targets we can and should go after. The challenges will increase, but so will our knowledge and experience, and so I'm extremely optimistic.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add on to that. As we go through time and we've taken things from sort of the bench into animals into human clinical trials, there are learnings along the way, and I think expertise that we get, particularly for Abeona in the EB space or in the metabolic space with lysosomal storage diseases. So we keep both an eye out for programs that we could opportunistically in-license or acquire in areas where we believe we can be successful, and we've had some expertise. I think also now, as we look into the development of these custom or targeted chimeric vectors, where we believe we have a vector that targets a certain tissue well, or detargets a tissue, or gets past the blood-brain barrier, et cetera. We're looking to, we look at the landscape from a competitive perspective, and don't want to be the 12th hemophilia program. Would rather be in a place that might be a little bit less crowded.
I was hoping that someone would just say, well, look, that's just the IP we got handed, and so we're stuck with it. But, Olivier, it seems like you guys might be looking at it a little bit differently, since you have so many partners and taking more of a partnership approach, but maybe that's wrong. How do you think about it?
Well, the way we've been thinking about selecting the programs that we have today on our clinical portfolio is very simply, what can be done today with the technology as we have it, and what are the best chances of success, and many others. Everyone is kind of doing this appreciation. I think we may have had a heads up on many of the programs that were run in academia. Because academia got access to our technology very early on, and many things got out of that. I mean, very good preclinical data became available directly to us. So we kind of probably had an opportunities to choose these programs. So we acknowledge that those are the things that we can do today. We'll do more with the same technology. We'll do more with advanced technology, because we don't think that this technology can be optimized, and so all these factors are in, and prioritization is a constant exercise, right? I guess everybody's doing that. People are also hiring wizards that are telling you with their computers what targets you should address, and that's that can be more or less useful, but there are different ways of doing that. I think you mentioned there's a lot of rare genetic diseases. I guess the like numbers 7,000, yeah, maybe. So, but you have to realize that most of them are maybe single patients or few patients, right? A handful. So if you now go to some, and all those will not be dealt with through a commercial system, right? This is something that may be done at a hospital at some point, but this is by no means something that we can address, right? So there is a cut, there is a limit. That can be, it can be pretty rare. And some of us are doing very rare disease, Matt. And that makes sense. But a few patients in the world, that doesn't make sense, right? So that's one first thing. But then you get into you at the end of your analysis, you have the usual suspect, hemophilia, everything, right? And opportunities, and then it's about judging of the quality of work which has been done around those diseases, how their level of readiness, basically, and the level of unmet need, and the risk you take by just getting into there. So that's, nothing really special, but and nothing I think very different from what everybody is doing.
So I know Matt loves this question in particular, so I'm going to punt it to him.
Oh God.
Commercial opportunity, but as soon as you start talking about commercial opportunity, the number one question is pricing. And there's of course, a group of individuals who think that, if you can show a significant improvement in our efficacy, you should be able to price, almost anything that you want. Others, not so much. And of course, it depends on the disease, right? Hemophilia, you already have products that are available, and maybe there are, certain barriers that have now been put in place. But it's a dreaded word that brings both fear and enjoyment, right? So fear to investors' hearts when they think about reimbursement, and then like joy when they think about potential market potential. And I'm sure all of you guys have to think about this. And Matt, I think, in particular, probably a lot more. I don't know.
Why do I think about it more?
Well, just because of the, like Olivier was saying, you know, some of the indications are in fact smaller, right? So one of the ways you can justify that is thinking about pricing as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on pricing, and then anyone else can kind of jump in.
Well, the first thing I would say is none of us should be afraid of talking about it. You know, if anything, it's the opposite.
Yep.
We need to be talking about it because we live in this incredible world where products using CAR T technology are being approved for leukemia, and you know, products using AAV delivery are being approved for inherited blindness, and it's going to continue in a really positive direction. It's the future of medicine in so many ways. So we have to live in a world where patients can get access to that. Period. It doesn't mean it's easy. I often like to say that just as much as we have focused for many, many years on innovation and the challenges of solving our research challenges in biotech, now we have a commercial challenge that needs to be solved too, which is really unique. How do you figure out how to ensure patient access to these one-time treatments that continue to have all the same challenges of traditional biologics product development, of expensive and high-risk research, but also are producing this amazing value? Can you imagine an MTM, if we're lucky enough to do what we hope, which is, and this is a disease for backup, is a boys only, it's an X-linked disease. Half of them don't live to see their second birthday. They're all born severely impaired, weak, can't breathe on their own, can't move their arms and legs. If we could, and in the first 12 weeks in our first patient, we took a boy who was 9 months of age, and in 12 weeks, he demonstrated notable improvement in his physical capabilities, his breathing capabilities. He was able to achieve 3 developmental milestones that a 9-month-old should all be able to do: hold their head up, roll over, you name it. That's incredible, right? And if that was to continue, and this drug goes to market, I mean, of course, we have to live in a world where that gets reimbursed. So now I don't know what the number is for that. I do know that every case is unique. Every company's, each disease, each company's product, there's no one answer to this challenge, but the last thing I'll say is I want to live in a world where we have better optionality for pricing than we do today, meaning let's get past we live in a system in the United States where you can just pay for a drug one time based on paying for this vial, and let's figure out a system where we can pay over time, we can risk share in an appropriate manner that ensures that all the parties that are relevant have stake in the game. It's hard for me to imagine going to a payer and saying, I think this MTM boy is going to not only is he going to survive, he's going to survive for the rest of his life. For 20 or 30 or 40 years, he's going to benefit. And I want this amount of money. And the payer says, Matt, you seem like a good guy, but you have 3 years of data. So how can I get there? We got to figure out a system to bridge that gap, and there's no perfect answer, but the good news is the conversation is going on. That's what I liked about, I know I'm going on too long, but you can tell I'm into it. What I liked about Novartis and Spark's efforts early on is that they started a dialogue around some of these challenges, and that's what we need the dialogue to ensure we get to that outcome that we all want, which is we live in a world where these incredible medicines get to all these patients.
So I think that, so it was interesting because when Spark priced their gene therapy, automatically there was this like polarizing effect, right? There were some that said, wow, that was very cheap, right, for the benefit that you're showing. And then others who said it wasn't cheap enough. And then there were a couple of models that were being proposed, right, to potentially pay for this, which I think added, an additional layer of discussion. And so I'm kind of curious. I would think that each of you are already either consulting with payers or at least talking with payers as you, even early on in development, start, moving things forward. Just kind of what are those discussions looking like? Maybe Jeff, you want to move forward with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Matt mentioned, as these therapies change, the way we pay for them and get access to them has to change as well. So you hear a lot of discussion with consultants and potential payers about outcomes-based models. You can do the financial analysis about the cost of these rare diseases to the healthcare system over many, many years. and you can make the pharmacoeconomic argument. The big question is durability. How durable will some of these therapies be, et cetera. And so there's a lot of discussions around, and I think you saw it in some of the press releases from Spark and some of the statements from GSK on Strimvalis about some kind of outcomes-based measurement. Do we have them come back in and get retested at year 2, year 3, year 4 for additional payments or rebates or what have you? I think the time has come that our massive infrastructure for reimbursement needs to basically adapt to these new therapies that could have very, very long duration and long clinical benefit, and actually develop a way that these can be paid for either over time or something to that effect.
Olivier, are you already in discussions with payers, and what kind of questions?
Well, I would say, well, first, I love to talk about pricing publicly because this is really something I don't know anything about. Yes, of course. But the type of discussions are very high level. Until you're at a late stage of what you're doing with data and everything, it's complicated to have very precise discussions. But yes, of course, there are discussions. Individual companies have these discussions. A forum like the Alliance here is also a very useful forum to foster this type of discussion, and that should definitely happen. I just want to say that I'm usually not really worried about the final outcome that we'll see. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you a price or something like that. But what I'm sure of is that if we have therapies for unmet need which are not incremental and which make a difference, right? Which are black and white, as we usually expect for gene therapy. The demand is so strong for that we'll find a way, right? And as Matt was saying, this is even if you have a few hundred patients, the burden is if you just want to be very, look at the cost of these patients and what it would take to cure them with gene therapy, it makes sense, and it should make sense.
So Arthur, you're coming off a roadshow and a recent IPO. I imagine that this was part of pretty much every discussion. What was the line?
The reality is we've been having this conversation since day one of the company, because we know that's what we have to do in order to meet the challenge. And I think the panel's done a great job of addressing how we should think about this, how we should collaborate on this, how we should engage in early discussions. We're a preclinical company, less than a year away from the clinic, and I've hired internal commercial expertise, a senior leader in the field, just for this reason, to be prepared for that conversation. I think a couple points. I think the field definitely got off to an inauspicious start with our initial commercial gene therapy not being a success, to put it mildly. So we have a long way to go. I think in contrast, what Spark's done and what Jeff did was a terrific job in really being thoughtful about new ways to think, how do we pay for transformational therapies that we're developing now? And to Matt's point, we're way ahead of the curve there in terms of the technology, but we're way behind the curve in terms of understanding how do we get this done. So I think the conversation that, for us has already started, obviously for my colleagues here has already started, which is all good for the industry, and I think we'll get there. You can't, there has to be a place for these kind of transformational treatments and cures. Has to be.
And I think actually investors are getting used to it now, right? So I can tell you from our perspective, we talk more NPV rather than, this percentage of this prevalent population, because in a couple of years that prevalent population might no longer be there. Look at the HCV space and how that's working. And so I think investors are already starting to get onto that bandwagon so that they can continue to fund these types of operations. So Olivier, I think the panel mentioned that you would be the best to start off with this. Talking more about clinical data, okay? I think investors fall into the mindset, I know I do, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but when we think about monogenic diseases, I almost assume that it's a given. If we have a good biological rationale, it's a monogenic disease. If we use a gene therapy to correct that disease, efficacy is almost a given. The flip side of efficacy is safety. And it seems that safety is what is driving a lot of investors to pay. It could affect investors' attention quite a bit, right? And a perfect example, and Matt's not going to like me for bringing this up, and maybe Olivier won't either. But Wilson's papers came out, and AAV9 was being looked at, and what high levels of AAV9 could potentially do from a safety perspective. You guys saw the Nature CRISPR papers, right? When that came out, the entire CRISPR space, took a nice downfall. It's all recovered and even gone higher. But clearly investors are focused on it. And I guess it's kind of a long-winded way of asking, how are you guys looking at that particular aspect? Are we thinking about that correctly, and that safety is more important than efficacy? And I guess, how do you maximize your work prior to getting into the clinic so that is, not a foregone conclusion, but has made investors extremely comfortable?
Yeah. It's good you mentioned the CRISPR paper, because it was eventually withdrawn, right? Yes. So it's proven to be wrong, and this is the way it's going to happen all the time. People make observations, they publish the observations. Now everyone has access to all the information at the minute where it's out. So we tend maybe a little bit to overreact to those. So in the case of the Wilson observation of very high doses of AAV9 showing toxicities, this is something that's, it's an observation. It's worth telling the community about it. What it is certainly not is, it's not a toxicology study, right? It just tells us that, yes, we should keep doing toxicology studies, which, by the way, we're doing, right? And we've done, and we'll keep doing. So it's one element in the debate. I think it didn't come as a surprise to any of us that, at some point when you keep raising the dose of AAV, of any type of capsid, actually, that you will, and some maybe more than others, but we don't know. But any type of AAV at such a high dose, it's possible, it's likely that we're going to start to see toxicities. So that's not a surprise for the community. That's not a surprise for the FDA, who's been having this information actually the FDA has all the information, and the FDA didn't overreact because they're doing their job to new information. They just took note. They didn't shut everything down or said stop gene therapy or this kind of thing. Others kept using AAV9 at very high doses, like Pfizer dosed their patient a few weeks after the paper was released. So Pfizer, having done very thorough, I can tell you, tox studies on AAV9 IV at high doses, concluded that they could go ahead, even though some others may have this observation. So I'm saying that, I don't want to play it down and say, well, this is nothing. This is something, and this is something that's worth understanding, that's worth working around. But there are ways of, one should do the real tox studies with your vector prep, not with some vector prep that you get from somewhere else. That's also one thing, right? We'll always, each time you try an active drug in a patient, you take a risk, right? Any drug. So gene therapy is not different for me.
Jeff, what about you?
Yeah, we got a number of questions around the Wilson paper and the solid biosciences experience. I would say that much was left unsaid about what was going on in the Wilson laboratory, as well as there's much that we don't know, more that we don't know than what we actually know. There's been a number of rebuttal papers, including some commentary by Dr. Barry Byrne, who is the head of our DMSB. We run 2 systemically delivered AAV9 programs in our Sanfilippo A and B program, and the safety profile has been quite good, actually. And there was a lot of commentary about assuming you do your toxicology studies, your non-human primate studies, so that you're picking what appears to be safe doses, that there are a number of clinical trials ongoing that have been very safe with high dose AAV9 systemically delivered. So while we have got inundated with questions, as I'm sure you have, Matt, and everyone, I think it's, these issues, these safety issues could be attributed to a lot of different things, including manufacturing process and what have you, and it's not just, high doses. So we like not to paint the whole AAV gene therapy industry with one brush.
Maybe Matt, before you answer just to kind of give your thoughts on it as well, instead of just even focusing on, the paper or some of the preclinical works that's done. I know a lot of you in the clinical studies that you're running, and Arthur, probably as you get ready for the clinic, you're thinking about it as well. There are probably just more than your standard sort of safety observations, right? Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you guys, being in the rare disease field, are doing?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, you started asking about how we think about safety, the importance of it. Of course, it's paramount in all of our minds. The last thing we want to do is cause any harm to anyone. That being said, we happen to work in life-threatening diseases with no treatment option, and so we want to try to move the science forward. So we do our very best preclinically. In AAV gene therapy, you're worried about immunology in different forms, and there's only one model that truly reflects it accurately, and that's humans. And so I think we're all learning quickly from all the experiences happening in the clinic, and it's going to be key to the long-term success. I'm extremely encouraged by the safety data so far from all the clinical trials that have been done, and by our own data. The findings in the Wilson work were confusing to us, given that although we happen to work with AAV8, that we've never seen anything like that. We've gone as high as 8 times 10 to the 14th vector genomes per kilogram in a non-human primate and never saw anything like that. So the body of data from AAV9 work, with Avexis in particular and others, and our work, just gives us a lot of comfort that what was observed and reported were more outliers than consistent with what has been observed. So we're very comfortable with it. That being said, there's plenty to be learned. I'll just highlight that as an example of how seriously we take immunology as a subject, our next investment in the company from a strategic perspective beyond our manufacturing investment is in immunology, and trying to establish ourselves as a leader in that field, and helping the whole field get to a place where we can better solve the challenges that fall into 3 main buckets, in our opinion. Number one, how can we better predict an individual patient's reaction to an AAV product, and ideally customize an immune suppression regimen to help him or her? How can we treat patients in the face of pre-existing anti-AAV antibodies? We all screen those patients out of our trials today, and that's fine, that makes sense, but in patients who have MTM1, we got to find a way to treat those kids, so that's an important question to solve. And number 3, the possibility of retreatment. I like to think of them all as cures, as we all do, but we just don't know that answer yet. And so I think continuing to research how, if you had to, and in our case, the high-class problem of having kept a kid alive who would have otherwise not survived past his 2nd birthday, alive and well at age 20 or 30, but needs retreatment, let's figure out how to do that. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but it all interrelates to the safety of these products, and how we've got, I think, great data to date, but still important issues to solve going forward.
Arthur, from as you're getting ready for the clinic, what sort of efforts are you putting in, knowing what's happening in the space?
Well, I think one of the things we benefit from is following behind the pioneers in the field. So there's a lot of learnings out there about how to monitor safety, how to avoid adverse reactions. So we have definitely benefited there in terms of understanding the immune response and understanding how to control that once you administer AAV. I think one thing that I would like to mention, and it goes back to Matt's point around investment in manufacturing and control over that, is your product is your process. and that's it. And if you don't have the process down, and if you're not absolutely sure on the analytics and what you're putting into patients, that's going to be an issue. So I think we were in the middle of our roadshow when all this hit the fan, and we got barraged with questions. I called Matt. I'm like, "What are you saying?" So it was confusing, and I think it goes back to what are we making and putting into animals, and then what conclusions are we drawing from that? And I think that's an area where there's got to be more collaboration and more communication. I think, Jeff, you were talking around that as well. I mean, I just felt like there's not enough information out there for us to really make a judgment or a call as to how to interpret this. So it's not that we're saying, we shouldn't think about safety. We absolutely think about safety as paramount. But we got a ways to go here.
So I'm going to open it up just briefly for questions, if there are any in the audience, because I want to be cognizant of the audience members. Otherwise, I do have another question. Cool. So one of the things, and Monday was probably a great example of the potential consolidation in our space. I think the markets today, all week, arguably for the last year, have really been taking into account, right, this potential for consolidation. I assume there's various forms of consolidation, right? So there's individual product licensing versus acquisition of the entire company. There's also, I guess, there's debate as to whether these are one-offs, right? So way back when, much older than any of you guys, I'm sure I am. When RNAi, the first company got acquired by RNAi, I think it was Pfizer acquired Cerna. Everyone thought there would be this wave, and there wasn't that wave right away. Are we in something similar right now? So I know I did a bunch of questions here, but what type of consolidation do you think will happen? Are we in that sort of a wave right now, or have we reached that tipping point? Because even from a safety perspective, unlike the Jesse Gelsinger incident, right, where there was a big shutoff, investors, you got your IPO done, investors seem to have gotten past that point where a one-off, a one article, or one-off thing is some sort of long-lasting ding on the entire space. Olivier?
Yeah, so I think the situation is very different from the RNAi story because we're much more mature in terms of technology. We have trials, it's in patients, and that's very different from the RNAi when this happened. And the explanation for why there was no real follow-up may be that, just it didn't, maybe people were thinking that it would reach the clinic much easier or something like that. Where we are today, so we start to accumulate know-how, knowledge about clinical programs, what we can do in the clinic, and I think the deals will be done on the heels of clinical data, more than a priori on a very preclinical stage type of program. I mean, there might be exceptions to that, but I think this will be much more on things that have been pushed forward towards phase 3 or even registration, and that means that we will keep for some time pushing these programs and getting more data on them before I mean, some of them are actually mature for this type of acquisition already, and that may happen very, very soon. I mean, Avexis happened, right? This is a big one. So we're going to see this happening more and more as we mature.
So I know we're.
But I don't see a tipping point where in the next 6 months everything's going to be acquired.
Everything's going to be acquired.
No.
I know we're kind of at the last minute, but I wanted to allow any of you guys to jump in and just kind of give your kind of parting thoughts to the audience in terms of consolidation, how you guys are thinking about this space. I know how the markets are.
Yeah, I mean,
curious how you guys are.
I'll just jump in real quick. I think that big pharma, big biotech is getting very comfortable with this space right now. That's clear. They've made a lot of investments, but I think Pfizer is a great example. Where's Donna? It's a great example of jumping in with Bamboo. I think we're going to see more of that, and we're getting inbound interest from companies I would never predict are interested in gene therapy. So it's a good harbinger for the future, I would say.
Not much to add to that. I mean, I think it's more and more getting involved. I think that's great. Better for patients, more investment in the space, an appreciation for the science and manufacturing, I think always seems to show up in some of those stories. So I do think it'll be an important part of the future of the field, and I think we'll see more of it.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about gene therapy 30 years ago, and it took 30 years to become an overnight success, right? I don't see wholesale consolidation happening this month, but I do think the large pharma, even large institutional investors who weren't sort of taking it very seriously now with the initial approvals and the initial pricings are now starting to say, if we weren't in it or weren't looking at it, it's time to actually get smart about it.
So I'm 1 minute over time, but thank you guys very much, and let's thank the panelists as well.